Sorry for the long wait between videos. Life got in the way, but I'm back and plan to get back in the swing of things with more videos to come. 3 ingredients down, 4 more to go, one final book in the series. How can the Cahills pull this off? And with the deadline looming, literally, they're in a race against time to not only stop Pierce, but to save Amy. The story begins moments after the end of Countdown, with Dan kidnapped and held captive by Pierce. He awakens aboard a private jet, bound to a chair. Also on board are Jolt and Kara Pierce. They're circling overhead as they try to interrogate Dan. They want to know about the antidote, but he refuses to spill. Then an attendant brings forward a syringe full of truth serum and injects Dan with it. He tries fighting the effects by thinking unpleasant thoughts, but his mind starts blurring thought and speech. He confesses about the antidote by accident before regaining his composure. We learn that Dan and Amy were gathering 3 clues themselves as their Cahill connections tracked down the other 3. Weird there was never any mention of these adventures in the books beforehand. He then reveals that the last ingredient is in Cambodia, in the Khmer Empire city of Angkor. In order to shut himself up, he spots a bottle of chloroform and uses his unbound arm to grab it and spills it all over his shirt. He inhales deeply and passes out. Jolt tries smacking him awake, but Kara tells him it's no use. When Jolt suggests they throw Dan overboard, she supersedes his order with her own, setting their travel plans for Cambodia. Jolt is growing resentful of his sister at this point. Amy is speeding along with Jake, Atticus, and Ian. All they have left of Pony is his computer, which Ian is attempting to use to look up information about the Tonle Sap water snake. As they near Guatemala City, he reads aloud about the slightly venomous snake which can be found in Tonle Sap, Cambodia's Great Lake. They get stuck in heavy traffic caused by Jonah Wizard making a sudden public appearance organized by Broderick Wizard. It's part of the plan to get the Cahill team aboard his private jet without alerting Pierce's men. They hope to use the crowd as cover. Jonah dives into the throng and is carried to their jeep and hops in. He has the police escort them the rest of the way. At a rally in New York Central Park, J. Rutherford Pierce is giving a speech to a huge crowd. He hides a spasm with a karate kick, and the crowd loses it. He also begins thinking about his plans for world domination,
World domination!
which includes setting off nuclear explosions to manipulate the American people for the election. Then his thoughts drift to Debbie Ann when she walks on stage, and how she was his second choice after failing to have a relationship with Hope Cahill. When he couldn't have her, he decided to hate her, and when she died, that hate carried to her kids. With the Cahills bound for Cambodia, Amy breaks a glass with her bare hands by mistake. The others remind her of her strength, and she goes on about what the serum is doing to her mentally and physically. When Ian can't access Pony's computer, Amy does it herself. A tracking beacon pops up on screen. They realize it's Pierce's jet, heading for Asia. With the Pierces, Dan wakes up as the plane lands. Jolt wants to interrogate him, and Kara goes to tighten his bonds. However, she begins loosening them instead, and slipping him instructions on how to escape. They begin taking off. Dan makes a break for it, jumping out of a moving plane and nearly running into another jet on the tarmac. He narrowly avoids getting pulled along with the jet's pull as it comes to a stop, and then runs for the airplane hangar. Jolt wants to go after him, but Kara orders otherwise. Back with Dan, he learns he's at the Naval Air Facility on Midway Atoll in the Pacific Ocean as he makes it to the hangar and hides inside, grabbing a crowbar. As someone approaches, he jumps out and swings at Amy of all people, who easily disarms Dan. They catch up and agree not to fight until Pierce has been taken care of, once and for all. In Delaware, Nellie is working as a cook after being Sammy Murad's assistant since they got caught. When Sammy passes by the lunch line, she conveys that she's hoping her new position helps them to execute their plan. Then, Dr. Callender comes down the line, and Nellie spits in his tiramisu without him seeing. With the Cahill team, they learn that Pony's tracking device is leading them to Siem Reap in Cambodia, the closest airport to the ruins of Angkor. Jake comments that Amy has become less apprehensive and more rash in her decision-making. Dan suggests they try to avoid confronting the Pierces. In Phnom Penh, the capital of Cambodia, Jonah is stuck at passport control briefly before they let him go, and he meets the Cahills in disguise. Hamilton soon joins them at baggage claim. Jonah has gotten them a boat, and says they'll take the Tonle Sap River all the way to Angkor. Ian points out that the tonless sap water snake is nearly extinct, so they'll have a tough time finding it. Also, because it's the dry season, their travel takes nearly 8 hours. To pass the time, they take turns casting nets in the hopes of catching a water snake. Everyone is miserable in the heat, which is also making Amy's hallucinations worse. Eventually, they arrive at the Tonle Sap proper before turning into the Siem Reap River, one of its many tributaries. Soon after that, they arrive in Siem Reap, a popular tourist destination. They book a stay at an out-of-the-way place called Jayavaraman, or Sleep Here, named after a famous line of ancient Khmer kings. On an island off the coast of Maine, known as Pierce's Landing, Rutherford is being interviewed by 60 Minutes as Debbie Ann watches on. She finishes sewing one of her many teddy bears and places it in a cabinet. To make room, she takes out a notebook and finds out it's Olivia Cahill's notebook. She figures Rutherford hid it there and rifles through its pages when she comes upon a sticky note that reads connection to hope, question mark. She gets emotional and realizes Rutherford hasn't cared about his family the entire time and is willing to sacrifice any of them for his goals. The next day, everyone head back to the boat to search the river, while Hamilton and Jonah visit a crocodile farm to see if they were still using the water snake as crocodile food, unofficially of course. Ian stood back to see if he can identify who Pony was tracking. The main gang arrives in Angkor, where Atticus explains that mostly the temples are all that remain because they were one of the few structures made from stone. Then, they pull up at Angkor Wat, one of the largest religious monuments in the world. When everyone starts making puns, Amy has a fleeting moment where she admires Jake's grin.
What is this shit?
Tourists dot the site as the group sails by. At the Reef Map Crocodile Farm, Jonah and Hamilton arrive after a lengthy trip by rickshaw. There, Jonah comments that he couldn't believe he once left Amy and Dan at the mercy of one of the creatures. After watching the crocodiles feed, they realize they didn't see any snakes and ask an attendant. They tell the boys that they're protected by the government. Then the duo sees a snake in one of the satellite ponds, and Hamilton barges in before anyone can stop him. When a croc snatches it up, he doesn't hesitate to begin trying to pry open the monster's maw. When three more crocodiles begin moving towards Ham, Jonah jumps the fence and immediately his disguise falls off, and all the tourists recognize him. The attendants arrive with reinforcements to fend off the crocs and orders the two Cahills to leave and never return. They quickly oblige. Back with the A-team, Ian is listening to a tour guide go on about the bas-relief statues of Apsaras at Angkor Wat. It gets him thinking about his estranged father, who now resides in South America. It makes him think of how lonely he is without Natalie.
No, I'm still sad.
He focuses back on the task at hand, trying to find Pony's target, who is somewhere in Angkor Wat. Then he spots her, April May, tapping away at her computer. All of a sudden, she breaks into Pony's laptop and begins wiping files from it. Ian rushes down to her and realizes why she looked familiar. It's the redhead from Ireland, now with blonde hair. When she tells him she is part of the bad guys, he sees the Pierce resemblance and calls her Kara Pierce. She says she is keeping her secret identity from her own father because she can't trust him. This strikes a chord with Ian, who couldn't trust his own parents. Ian is hesitant to trust her though, but she says she can help him find the antidote. She wants to save her father before the serum destroys him. As Kara restores Pony's computer to get him to trust her, he realizes he's fallen for her, which again, kinda icky considering they are both Cahills in the end. With Dan and Amy, they're trying to stay cool aboard their boat when they spot a speedboat coming towards the group. It's Jolt Pierce with some hired muscle, quickly gaining on them. Jake takes control of the boat and speeds off. When Jolt pulls out a grappling hook and buries itself in the gunwale, Amy then gets an idea and pushes the boat further, making a turn to swing the speedboat around and send it crashing into the docks, sending the men flying. But Amy gets their boat stuck in the muddy bank of the river. The Cahills and Rosenblums flee, leaving the boat behind. They arrive at another stone monument, Ta Kale. Atticus leads them through the structure as Jolt pursues them. Then, Amy, with her serum-enhanced brain, realizes there is a room below that might save them. They set to work trying to pry one of the blocks of stone free, and eventually they find it. Together, they pry it free and head down into the dark together. Amy does her best to cover the entrance again, and they find a secret room full of ancient Khmer fireworks. But the moment is ruined by the arrival of Jolt Pierce. Dan thinks quickly and uses Atticus's belt buckle to create sparks that are able to ignite the explosives. Everyone hits the deck as they go off, and their enemies are knocked unconscious. Together, they flee back into the open, where they find the police swarming their boat. Dan, brilliant as always, is able to distract them with the smoke coming from Tak Hill, another architectural site ruined by the Cahills. At Trilon Labs, Sammy and Nellie are pretending to be working on Pierce's serum project, but in reality, they're making lots of nitroglycerin to blow up the lab and everything in it, maybe even the whole building. They're prepared to sacrifice themselves if that's what it takes. Nellie leaves and transports a few gallons of the explosive material to a closet located above the main gas line. Before she reaches it, she runs into Dr. Benoit. She tells him she's transporting sugar and he asks her for a taste, but she slaps his hand away and he gives up, thankfully. The next day, the Cahill gang plans to go fishing to try and catch a water snake. They catch a ride out of town and head south towards Tonle Sap. Amy thinks about how even though she is deteriorating, her body is becoming stronger too. The picture of health when she is anything but. Hamilton got a call from the police. He's now a person of interest. Ian mentions his run-in with April May yesterday. She tells him how she wants to change sides, but Amy is doubtful and refuses to trust her, even arguing with Dan over it. In the end, they relent to her demand. They have their driver drop them off near the lake. It's unique for how it changes sizes with the seasons, and since it's the dry season, it's much shallower than it can be. Together, they head towards the water and fan out with their net. It isn't long before Atticus, in an attempt to avoid the mosquitoes, spots the snake while underwater. He yells and everyone comes running as fast as they can. It's a frenzy of commotion as everyone searches to no avail. They're disheartened, but it does mean there are snakes in the water. That's when Dan asks where Amy is, and they quickly look around. And then Hamilton spots her shirt in the muddy water and helps pull her out. There's another commotion as everyone is frantically trying to save her, seeing who knows CPR before Hamilton quickly flips her upside down and begins shaking her. Jake tells Ham to stop, but he ignores him until Amy begins coughing up water. She blacked out and the others are concerned, but Dan mentions that the antidote is the only solution for all of it, so together they head back into the water for hours waiting. Then, they hear the driver drive off without them and see Jolt Pierce and his goons. Rutherford had bribed the police into releasing them. Amy tells the others she will take on three and for the rest to defend each other. Then, she quickly moves towards Jolt, attacking him mid-speech, causing him to fall into the lake. Then she uses her leg to hold him below the water as she holds off two more goons. Ian, Hamilton, and Dan work together to fight another henchman, giving it their all. Then Jake yells for everyone to stop fighting. One of the men have Atticus as a hostage and is threatening to drown him. Everyone stops except for Amy, who threatens to drown Jolt. It takes Dan ordering her to stop to get her to back down. Jolt orders them to be rounded up and they begin making their way back to shore. When Jonah sees a log in the water, he reaches into the water, grabs a rock, and flings it at the object, which disappears below the water. Then it comes flying back out, a huge crocodile in front of Jolt, and now all 13 of them are running for their lives. Amy takes the chance to open palm punch Jolt in the nose. A Humvee pulls up and the driver, in a balaclava, orders them in. Without much choice, they hop in and the driver speeds off. She reveals herself to be none other than Kara Pierce. They talk back and forth about how she can help them, but only if they trust her, and Amy still has her doubts. They realize they wasted another day and still no snake, but when Ian complains about his ruined loafers, who wears loafers on a quest through a swamp is my question. But in the loafers, we find a small Tonle Sap water snake, which barely scratches Ian with its fangs. They place it in a water jug in the back and continue driving, and consider whether they should trust Kara or not. Amy agrees only on several conditions like giving up her phone, destroying its GPS chip, blindfolding her, and handcuffing her. Kara quickly agrees before Dan can object. At the hotel, Amy ties up Kara with a dog leash, because that's all that there was. And then Kara notices how irritated Ian's nose looks. The snake is slightly venomous after all. He looks up how to treat a snake bite, as Dan says they have to get the ingredients to a lab to be processed to make the antidote. Atticus and Jake return with insects for the snake to eat. Jonah announces that the jet cannot pick them up until noon tomorrow because it's in Newfoundland. Newfoundland? As now that he's not touring, he rents out his G6 when he's not using it.
You what?
Kara has trouble sleeping that night, which only makes sense. She is tied to an iron pipe after all. Kara thinks about how she's betraying her father, but for a good reason. She also thinks about Amy and her nightmares, how she's suffering from the serum, just like Kara is. Then she slips out of her restraints with ease, grabs the water jug, and slips out into the night.
You raggedy bitch.
Jake wakes up the next day, reminding us that Amy has barely 48 hours left. Then he notices the empty leash and yells for everyone to get up and tells them Kara left. They're all dressed in minutes, ready to barge out, when in walks in Kara with a new aquarium with a handle and the tonle sap safely inside. She tells them she is on their side. She just made sure her brother wouldn't put out a search party for her. Then she tells the Cahills her idea for getting the serum into her dad and all his enhanced people, going on about a clam bake. Wikipedia tells me that this is a seafood picnic. I'm not a fan of seafood, so I wouldn't really know. With Nellie and Sammy, they rig the nitro to blow in 3 minutes and set off the poison detector and put on masks. Together they rush out, hide in the bathroom, and lose their guard. Then they head out and towards the complex's main office suites, the opposite of the evacuees. Somewhere around this point they also kiss, so that happens. But down a hall, Nellie is grabbed by Dr. Jeffrey Callender, who threatens to snap her neck, because he's a doctor and apparently he can do that. Nellie and Sammy work together to beat him back and continue running. In an office, they try to set off a small explosive they had hidden by the wall that would create their exit point, but it doesn't go off. As the main explosive begins to detonate, Nellie, in a last-ditch effort, throws a paperweight at the explosive and it goes off, and they run through. They run as far as they can and away from the site of destruction, the whole building destroyed. In the Siem Reap airport control tower, Jolt and his father, who's over the phone, threatens air traffic control into not allowing Jonah's plane to land. In the midst of their conversation, the lights go out in the tower, but remains on in the rest of the airport. Rutherford yells over the phone that they've been hacked, and Jolt realizes they cannot leave the room either, as the building has gone into lockdown. Kara is of course the one behind the hacking. This team just wasn't complete without an Ekaterina. Anyway, the Cahills file out of the jungle surrounding the airport and onto the tarmac. The co-pilot says they need to refuel, but Kara says she's booked a refueling stop in Thailand for them. Everyone files aboard except for Kara, who will rendezvous with Jolt and be their inside agent. Ian tries to say goodbye and tell her how she makes him feel, but can barely get the words out. Hamilton drags him on board and they take off. Nellie and Sammy are reading an article about Rutherford and his planned clam bake, where he will announce his run for presidency under the new Patriotist Party. They're in a lab under Harvard. They borrowed it from Dr. Sylvius Young, a cousin of the O family, so they're Ekaterinas as well. Soon the Cahill team arrives, and they catch each other up, except for Ian, who was stopped by U.S. immigration because they thought he had a tropical disease. Sammy gets to work on the analyzing and synthesizing the ingredients and creating the antidote. Amy gets a checkup by Dr. Seung, who gives Amy 2 days, and Amy thinks about how her and Dan are used to living in the moment.
Won't somebody please think of the children?
When Ian gets back, Sammy gathers the others because the antidote is complete. It's a syringe because it's the fastest way to deliver it to the bloodstream, but it can also be ingested or made into an aerosol. But Amy refuses to take it, saying it's their only advantage. When Jake asks Dan what he thinks, everyone is surprised that Dan is on board. But they realize they need to test the antidote on someone, and that's when Nellie gets an idea. She visits Fisk Cahill at the Callender Institute in New York City. There she is able to convince a nurse to let her visit him, and she tells him Dr. Callender has been experimenting on him with Gideon's serum, but she has the antidote. She tries it on him, and at first he begins writhing in agony and his eyes roll back in his head, but then he's completely fine, all cured. Amy is busy taking pilot lessons from someone who owed Hamilton's dad a favor. Jake is there too, all sad that Amy is slowly wasting away and refuses to take the antidote. He walks away to catch his breath, and Amy has a seizure, and when she comes to, tells the teacher not to tell Jake what happened. Dan is visiting his Aunt Beatrice at her penthouse. He's brought Saladin the cat some red snapper. Then he hears Rutherford on the TV, and Aunt Beatrice goes on about how she'd support him if she could. Then she talks about how Hope, their mother, should have gotten with him instead of Arthur Trent. It isn't until she comments on Amy that Dan loses it on the old lady, giving her a piece of his mind before leaving. With Kara in Maine on Pierce's Landing, she has a conversation with her father about how he wants her to be his successor because he doesn't think Jolt has what it takes. Then he says he has 6 surprises hidden around the world and does not elaborate. Hamilton, Dan, Ian, and Jonah are taking a Zodiac raft to Pierce Landing under the cover of dawn, security on the island already tight as Kara guides them in. They see they're hopelessly outnumbered and hope that Jake and Amy can deliver the payload in time. After hiding the deflated boat, Kara leads them to a hidden shed equipped with disguises. She's also set up a picnic, complete with some Earl Grey tea for Ian. With Amy, Atticus, Sammy, and Jake, they've tricked a couple, the Penobscots, into thinking they want an all-expense-paid cruise, which they will have thanks to Amy, who splurged a little. They drive up to their home in Saco, Maine. Their plan is to use the couple's crop duster to drop the payload. They begin loading up the crop duster with the antidote. After sunrise, the Pierce landing begins teeming with activity as guests arrive by boat and by plane. Debbie Ann is rudely interrupted by security during an interview about her teddy bear hobby. She goes to ask her husband about it, and they get into an argument where he says he wishes he had a wife more like Letitia Tyler, who died in 1842 while her husband was in office. Debbie realizes her husband is planning to kill her. Meanwhile, in the shed, the boys have donned their disguises as maintenance and are waiting for Kara to come get them. It's a while before she does, and they easily mix into the crowd of workers on the island. With Amy and Jake, the plane is loaded up and they say their goodbyes to Atticus and Sammy. When they're out of sight, Amy knocks Jake unconscious and runs to take off. But as she's driving down the runway, Jake appears and hurls himself into the plane. When she asks why he would risk his life, he says she must not know him very well. Then she says, "I'd swear you were a Cahill. Might as well propose." But then Amy blacks out again, and when she regains consciousness, she barely has time to right the plane. Jake pulls out a syringe of the antidote, telling Amy to take it. She doesn't, of course, and flings it to the back of the plane. She was willing to risk it all. Nellie and Fisk are watching from Manhattan, seeing the event live. With Dan and the boys, they're running out of time and still no sign of Amy. When Rutherford is about to be introduced, Jonah runs on stage to stall for time, but not for long as Pierce's muscle closes in on him. Amy and Jake are closing in on the island, but Amy's body won't respond to her. She begs Jake to take control of the plane. As the men close in on Jonah, the crop duster comes barreling over them, coating the crowd in the aerosolized antidote, instantly causing the Serum Enhanced people to writhe in agony. This causes instant panic and a stampede. In the midst of the chaos, as Rutherford attempts to regain control of the situation, his wife comes to him and asks what they're going to do with all those clams. And he loses it on her for focusing on such a trivial idea when he had bigger worries. He even throws her to the ground, and all of it is caught on live TV, broadcasting how abusive he really is to the whole world, ruining his image forever. But the moment doesn't last as Jolt comes charging towards Jonah. In the plane, the moment of triumph doesn't last either as Amy passes out, not regaining consciousness this time. Jake props her against the controls as he searches for the syringe, finds it, and injects her with the antidote. As the plane comes hurling out of the sky, Jake yells for Amy to pull up. On the island, Hamilton saves Jonah from Jolt and Ian helps Kara back up. Pierce realizes his daughter's deception and says he can cause mayhem even without the serum. Very Joker-coded. The henchmen attack, but in their weakened state, they're easy to dispose of. Then they chase after Rutherford, who's running to the mansion. The plane crashes into the ocean and begins sinking quickly. Jake is able to save Amy and use the floating aerosol container to keep them afloat as he slowly makes his way to Pierce Landing. On the island, the Cahills and Kara arrive at the mansion, not finding Rutherford. They find a light on in a room and find it locked. Hamilton tries breaking it down, but it doesn't budge, so Kara picks the lock. She goes in first, and they enter after, finding Rutherford on his laptop. He says they can't stop him. He'd already tapped his reserves of serum, but Kara says she poured that out the night before. He admits that he had 6 nuclear devices hidden around the world and will cause chaos and kill thousands to become president. Hamilton uses a towel to choke and restrain him. Ian goes for the laptop, but Rutherford says only April May knows how it works, and Kara says she did it not knowing what it was for. Jake is fighting his own battle as he realizes that the aerosol tank is sinking. He doesn't get much closer before it goes under, and he can barely keep Amy afloat before they're both sinking. At the last moment, though, Amy wakes up and they begin swimming to shore. They arrive and are caught up by the others in the mansion as they try guessing the abort codes. Eventually, they realize it's their mother's name, Hope Olivia. Rutherford cries as he finally loses. 4 months later in Minalapa, Dan and Amy are with Fisk to return Olivia Cahill's notebook to where they found it. Nellie couldn't come because her and Sammy are getting serious. Jonah is touring again, and Hamilton is his manager. Debbie Ann opened a toy company after divorcing Pierce and taking him for all he's worth. Oh, and Dan and Amy are out of the family. They're done. They need a break, and they are going to travel the world on their terms this time.
You what?
And Ian Cabral and Kara Pierce have been left in charge of the Cahill family and get to live at Grace's mansion in Attleboro. The ending was definitely a bit rushed, but what a nice way to wrap things up. Oh, forgot to mention that Amy and Jake are maybe sorta kinda an item again. Rutherford was one of the most insane villains yet, wanting to nuke the world to become president. Then again, we sadly see how far-reaching the powers of the President of the United States can go. is not too much of a leap, I guess. The book series came out during the first term of Donald Trump as president, so I'm sure it was and still is in many ways topical. I do wish we got to see the other 3 clues that were found by other Cahills. It probably exists in some form with the cards and online interactive media, but I wouldn't know. Other than saying Amy and Dan should be taxed to high heaven and have their wealth redistributed, I don't have much else to say. I'll be back next time with a new book series to explore with all of you. Please give the video a like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe if you haven't already. Bye!
Bye!